What I wouldn't give for the love of a good woman. I'd give up booze and opium and that little toy I had sent from Paris. Oh, don't be shocked. None of you, not even you, Tom.
Hello, I'm Amanda Garner. Welcome back to the second episode of Ride With Me, a podcast about the queerness of Rockstar's Red Dead Redemption 2. One of the elements that this game is well known for is its world building. Players can spend endless hours traversing the landscapes and varied levels of civilization found across the map. We interact with environments that are filled with animals and people that provide different experiences. While some of these NPCs, or non-playable characters, provide epic game moments, so many more serve as a means to make the world of Red Dead feel alive. The setting of this game is steeped in real 19th century U.S. history, creating an interesting mixture of truth and realistic fiction. From the weather's effects on the land and living things to the relationships between random NPCs, every aspect of this game feels intentional. And even though the story of the Van der Linde gang is meant to impact the setting, it is as though the world of the game moves on its own. The work that went into writing the story of the game produced seemingly endless things to be discovered, and anyone who has played Red Dead Redemption 2 knows that while there are limited outcomes to Arthur's story, every individual playthrough creates entirely different experiences. The minds behind this game wanted people to be deeply immersed, and they did so by weaving in stories and imagery intended to reflect Arthur's changing views on the world and his place in it. The game has many themes, most of which connect to how love, hate, life, death, and freedom alter the protagonist's experience. So it makes sense for this world to have queer characters. Why wouldn't it? As much as some narrow-minded individuals try and deny it, queer history has been around for all of human history. Our history is everywhere. There are ancient Egyptian paintings depicting same-sex relationships between real people. In ancient Greece, there are written histories and myths about cultural and social practices pertaining to queer relationships. We have the ancient writings of Sappho of Lesbos that describe the poet's various romances with other women, thus creating the term lesbian. An ancient Chinese emperor cut off his own sleeve so that his lover, who slept on his arm, would not be awakened when he got up. Amongst the elite, having one sleeve became a fashion trend and tribute to their love. And the term, the passion of the cut sleeve, is still used today in modern China to represent queer love. European colonialism destroyed many cultures across the world, and with it, an attempt to erase cultural queer history. Throughout Africa, the Americas, and Pacific Islands, there are ancient beliefs and practices that support the idea of gender being a social construct. Many of these indigenous cultures still believe in more than two genders and allow individuals to decide what their gender is. These people, who would also be considered transgender or non-binary, were often esteemed as religious and cultural leaders. Now, I am only giving a very brief overview to queer history and culture, and I encourage you to learn more about this topic and how it varies from culture to culture. Of course, I will have all of my resources listed at the end of this podcast. Most of the queer historical references found in Red Dead Redemption 2 are based on real people and practices in the US and England. The concepts of color coding in fashion and lavender marriages were documented among the white upper class. This is not to say that these concepts did not exist with non-white individuals or the working class and poor. There is just more evidence of it from this era of the U.S. While most of the queer NPC moments occur among the white upper class, There are clear examples elsewhere in Red Dead Redemption 2. As with real US history involving the Wild West, most of the NPCs a player can meet outside of cities are seen as male. This is not a coincidence. So many young men traveled out west to find jobs and adventure. However, it also is important to acknowledge that many also did so out of necessity, to be able to live and love as God made them. Being away from big cities and towns made life very dangerous, as we often see in Red Dead. But it would have been worth it to remain free from laws created to hurt and control queer people. I had the privilege to speak to Nicola from Fife, Scotland. We discussed specific interactions with NPCs that are prime examples of queer world building in Red Dead Redemption 2. Thank you, Nicola, for joining me today. Tell me how you discovered Red Dead.
Well, Red Dead just came about randomly, really. I didn't play much of the first one originally. I just messed around. I basically acted like some silent movie villain by constantly tying people up on train tracks. I didn't play the game properly. But Red Dead 2, I just bought it on a whim in tail end of 2018, going into 2019. And I'm fairly glad I picked it up because it came about at a time where home life was really difficult, a lot of things going on at home, um, and yet took a lot of stress away. It was a great form of escape. Um, you heard people talking about that during like the COVID pandemic, during lockdown. It was a way for people to kind of, escape from what was going on in reality. And yeah, I got really emotionally attached to Arthur, like everybody who played the game, and it is the first game that I can think of where I've literally bawled my eyes out at the
Yeah.
end.
Yeah.
I'm a bit like a robot in certain aspects when it comes to emotions sometimes. Takes a lot for me to get an emotional reaction from something. There's only several pieces of media that can do that. Red Dead 2 and Supernatural. Those are the only two. The only two characters I have ever cried over, aside from episode 3 of The Last of Us, which did like The Last of Us TV series, that got me
Yeah.
big time. Big
Oh,
time.
yeah.
I'm not the only one.
No, it destroyed me.
Yeah, the only two characters I've ever cried over is Dean Winchester and Arthur Morgan. No.
So out of curiosity, I'm from the Southeast United States. I'm from the place where most of this game takes place. And, and I've talked to, other people who are from the region where, the first Red Dead Redemption takes place in the desert and everything. But, for me, it just feels, like I'm home and it's just a part of my life. I don't really think about, how, the culture of the game is anything significant, because I'm from the same place. But every time I've talked to someone who is not from the States, you're from Scotland, it's always, oh, we just really love this. And I'm just wondering for you, I mean, how do you see, because you talked about escapism earlier, how do you see this whole shift in genre for a Western? Because usually Westerns are, in deserts, but we have a Western in the South, in a different kind of region. And how does that, how do you view all of that?
Oh, because I know Rockstar likes to do kind of like satire a lot when
Yeah.
it comes to kind of like mocking culture or how like society works. And I've always kind of like viewed Red Dead as kind of like a homage to kind of like the perception of what people think America is.
Yeah.
That's yeah. But
Yeah.
because you're like growing up outside of the US, you have this image of America that's kind of like ingrained from childhood. It's either like the Old West, old Hollywood, or gangster.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's one of three usually. And yeah, I just find it a fascinating exploration through like a different location and time period where it's not really familiar to us. It's not
Mhm.
something we're kind of like grow up on. I mean, imagine in the US, that's it's part of your history. You
Yeah.
know that there's this section of your history where countless people went westward
Hmm.
in search of like a new life and to colonize and set up shop.
Hmm.
Um, but it's just interesting from like a non-US perspective. You know, it's unique. It's like a niche that's not there's not enough Western video games.
Something we talked about in the last episode was a little bit about queer coding in speech, and that and I've pointed this out, I think, to different people throughout, you know, the past couple of years that I've played the game, how you know, queer coding in our language changes, you know, changes depending where you are, and so much of identifying queerness in things is to do with intonation or just the way it's used in that region. And I mean, I know like something that would be considered a queer coded thing where I live may not be that way where you live, or vice versa. And so that's one of the biggest things about that has fascinated me about this game, is that I know what queer coding looks like nowadays, you know, in modern society, you know, the things that we do to show each other who we are without, you know, putting ourselves in danger, or to, you know, to identify each other. And it's just been so fascinating doing this research and finding this stuff in the game, because it's all over the game if you know how to look for it. And I ran into this, you know, where people say, oh, you're just looking for it, you just want to find it. And there's so much, you know, there's just so much pushback about that, but there's so much historically, not just in the United States, but in Ireland, Scotland, and in England, from this time period from the late 1800s, that were so strongly queer, that it's just been so cool to find in the game.
I mean, I'm a history nerd, complete history nerd,
Mhm.
but I'm fairly unfamiliar with queer history. I mean, I
Yeah,
only came out several years ago, and
yeah,
I don't feel fully out
yeah, I
either.
understand.
I identify as pansexual,
Mhm.
um, but I'm also somewhere on the asexual spectrum as well.
Yeah,
Where I align, I don't really know yet, but I know I just feel outside of the quote unquote norm.
yeah.
Um,
And you know, and I hear about this with Red Dead. They're like, they didn't have those words back then. How can you think that they're, you know, they're queer? And it's like, but that's just it. They knew themselves. These people knew how they felt about things. They didn't have necessarily the words for it. And that's the thing, is we assume they didn't have words. They just
they would have
had
had their
different.
own, they would have had their own unique language, which would have been
Yes.
tied to that time in history. And
Yes.
like everything in history, things evolve, language falls out of favor, new words come in, and new ways to identify come
Yes.
in.
Yes. And this is where Red Dead just is such a queer game, is in its world building. And it's not just the ships. It's not just the whether or not Albert and Arthur have a thing, or Charles and Arthur have a thing, or Sadie is secretly a lesbian. It's not just that. It's this entire world that if gamers were to slow down and kind of look around, and a lot of players do, they start noticing things, and they may not recognize it because you never have heard this before, you never seen it, or you didn't know that that's what it was. And that's where this game just kicks my just kicks my teeth, and it feels like
There does seem to be a lot of coding um It's like I said, I still don't feel fully out yet. It's weird because it's like I want to like express more, but at the same time, there's something holding me back, and I don't know what it is. But
It's whenever, look, the thing is about coming out and experiencing your queerness, it's different for everybody, and the
yeah,
time it takes is different for everybody, and it's your story, and and you gotta go with it. So going into these interactions with people in the world of Red Dead, um there's some, to me, there's things that are more obvious. In the last episode we talked about Alden.
Alden is definitely
Yeah.
queer. I mean,
And
if you look at the little card that he gives you, anytime Alden you have a conversation with Alden and he gives you a little card, he puts kisses.
these little
He
X's and
puts
O's.
kisses at the end, and it's
I
like
know.
he's clearly smitten with Arthur, and who wouldn't be?
Yeah. And those kinds of moments are like more of an what are, I think, meant to be more straightforward queer moments. But like there's and those are the kinds of things that, like, I think a lot of gamers are like throwaway queer moments.
Yeah.
And but then there's these moments like, um on a broad spectrum, we have the new discovery gamers have made about what we talked about earlier about um the mayor of Strawberry. And that if you they really tried to like they really tried hard to make it hard to find, but you find out through these letters that between him and his sister, that he fled to the mountains to escape. Him and his partner fled to the mountains to escape um, being ostracized for their relationship. And he's, but it's pretty clear what she's trying to say in the letter, even though she doesn't say it directly. Um, and the mayor of Strawberry keeps referring to this wife he has, but there is no wife. There's only this guy in the welcome center who's very familiar and who came with him from the big city. And like he
Ooh, I
runs
don't know
the
that. I
yeah
didn't know that.
yeah people have sat and had every conversation possible with the guy, and gone to the point where like they how you get the letter, and how you get the letter is a little shady. You have to like tackle him and steal it from him, basically, which is not good. But and so that's like, okay, that's a weird one, like, um and then there's the mayor of Saint Denis. That there's this whole hard to find, hard to make happen because it's very timed, side missions where you're going through and doing the story with the mayor and his aide. And even though they ultimately turn on each other in that, there is some sort of like power couple thing going there.
Hmm.
And if you watch it, the way they talk to each other, they don't talk to each other the way straight men do. And there's going to be some people arguing, oh, they're just talk like that because they're French. No, straight Frenchmen don't talk like that to each other. They don't. That's it. That, I mean, they talk way too intimately to each other. And the way that they refer to what we have built in Saint Denis, and it's very much a power couple thing. And there's those kinds of stories all throughout the game, where there are queer characters, Mr. Black and Mr. White.
Oh, definitely.
There you go.
Definitely. I
Yeah.
mean, literally the last interaction you get with those two, they're in a treehouse together
Yeah.
up by Hanging Dog Ranch. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, they've escaped jail and they're obviously hiding out together, but they bicker like a married couple.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
It's so obvious.
yeah.
And
I love the interactions between those two. It's just hilarious.
I know that people can argue and say, well, Arthur disapproves of this. I've seen people make jokes about that, where it's like they'll talk about Mr. Black and Mr. White and have Arthur over here being, oh gosh, they're gay. It's like, you realize that if Arthur was scared of them being gay, he wouldn't have helped them. There wouldn't have been the option to help them. And so the fact that he does help them shows that's not the issue. They're idiots is what's the issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another example that I know I have is French Charles
Mm-hmm.
Chatanet, the guy that you come across in Saint Denis.
I
who
love him.
you can help. And it's probably one of the best Arthur moments when he laughs in the art gallery when Charles is getting whacked with a handbag by that middle-aged woman because he's been painting people in their undergarments.
Mhm.
But it's the final encounter that you have with Charles where you have to help him get to the docks,
Yeah.
and he's dressed as a streetwalker. He's all like face done up like a painted lady, fake wig and everything like that. And at one point, when you're escorting him, you have to make a dash into the trolley station,
Hmm.
and to like cause a distraction, Charles kisses Arthur square on the mouth, and Arthur barely reacts. He
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
brushes it off. He's like, "Don't do that again."
Don't do that
And I
again.
remember thinking, Arthur's done that before.
Yeah, and
He's
people
done
are
that
like, people are
before.
like, well, they're just trying to, avoid getting captured. And Arthur wipes off all that pancake makeup.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right about how he reacts. That's how you know that he's not disgusted by it. He's just like, dude, you
He
got into my
was.
personal space. You
But
didn't ask to kiss me.
if Arthur had such an issue, he probably would have killed Charles right there in the spot.
Instead, he keeps helping
Putting
him.
his hands on him, but he
And
doesn't.
then he beats up those guys even and
Yeah.
gets a bounty on them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Charles is he is your I want to say he's almost a stereotypical like bisexual. I say this as a bisexual.
Stereotypical French guy.
Yeah, he is such a horn dog. And yeah, he talks about he really does prefer the ladies. He does. But he also talks about there's also quite a lot of references to he has had men. He talks about it. He prefers women. He's very like, oh God.
I mean, one of the paintings in the gallery is a guy with his bare ass hanging out.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh yeah, very very focused on the ass.
Definitely swings both ways.
Yeah, in his little drunken conversation in the bar with Arthur, he flat out says he's been with both. And and Arthur's just like, okay. He's not like thrown off by it. The guy at the bar doesn't seem thrown off by it at all either. Like, okay. It's a seedy bar. And historically, a lot of the kinds of places you would go to pick up male prostitutes would be seedy bars. And there was that term slumming it. And it comes from that time period, where wealthier people would go down into the lower class area regions of cities to find prostitutes, and they would visit these little bars. So I doubt the barman was even like shocked that Sean Steadman was so loud about it.
Is it not said as well that historically in the past the only women that you would find in bars would be sex workers as well, because women weren't allowed to go unaccompanied to bars?
Yeah, to a lot of the bars. Yeah,
it's like a social taboo. Like women didn't do that.
And
which is kind of weird because later on when you meet Sadie in the saloon, it's like
they didn't give a shit.
Sadie wouldn't have given the damn. Sadie was like, I just want a drink.
So speaking of bars in Saint Denis, so there is the Bastille. So I spent way too much time in the Bastille. I pretty much feel that most of my non-actually playing the game hours spent in the game has been Arthur hanging out in or around the Bastille, because when I started thinking about all of this stuff, I just got a sense there was something going on with the Bastille. There was just, I couldn't put my finger on it. So then I started doing this research, and Oscar Wilde, going back to him, is what started it, because I know he popularized the green carnation and the color green as being a symbol of queerness. So I was thinking, well, what's going on here? I'm noticing there's a lot of men in the Bastille who are wearing red ties. Now, red vests were a popular thing, but red ties I don't see very often in the game. And I was like, okay, maybe it's just a coincidence. I started counting how many men were coming in and out of the Bastille wearing red ties. I did more research and found out that red ties were actually in cities in Europe. So it would make sense that it would be also at the Bastille, because it's a very worldly place, that red ties were a way to advertise your queerness. But I noticed that there is an obvious absence of certain colors that you see men wear in the game. Minus the O'Driscolls, you don't see very much green. You don't see any, I mean, if you see green, it's not bright green. When you get into Saint Denis, you see no green. And if I swear, if any of you listeners out there find a guy in Saint Denis wearing green, please, for the love of God, send me a picture. Because I've been taking pictures. Green at this time would have been probably in Saint Denis would have been more known to be a color because of Oscar Wilde, to advertise being queer. But also, you never see men wearing purple, and except for one guy. There's literally one man in the entirety of all of Saint Denis that I have found wearing purple, and it is that shade of purple that is associated from like the early 1800s and on to be a queer color. It's that lavender purple, and he hangs out upstairs in the Bastille with the female prostitutes. He just sits around up there with smoking cigarettes, and he's fancy. He's an older man. He's got this bright satin lavender vest on, and I'm going, is that a male prostitute? It's what I'm thinking. And I looked it up, and that color was worn by men during that time period to advertise you weren't just queer, but you wanted to hook up. And so I was thinking, oh my gosh, who put this in this game? There's got to be more. So I started looking around. Paisley is a big one. You don't see anybody. The only man you see wearing paisley in the game, of course, is Trelawney. And the kind of paisley he's wearing a peacock paisley vest. That peacock feathers, especially in paisley, was an absolute queer, at the time considered a queer thing. I mean, there's just more. I mean, I don't know. What are your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah. I don't want to speak on behalf of straight guys, but pastel colors don't seem to, match with the aesthetic of straight guys. Straight guys seem to be more quite bold, kind of neutral colors, and obviously not to generalize queer guys either, but it seems more common.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, again, it might sound a bit generalizing, but yeah, it's something I've not really paid attention to in Saint Denis. I've been more interested in hearing the rants of Lillian Powell that's usually set by her.
Oh gosh, yes, we're gonna get to her.
I get more distracted by her, and getting chased out of the Bastille because I've kind of walked up somebody's heels, even though they stopped directly in front of me.
Yes, you can hardly move in that place.
And then suddenly I have a problem, and then another problem I tend to have in and around the Bastille is getting on my horse. I have a bad habit of, not my fault, it's just how the game's programmed, but anytime I go to mount my horse, I end up tackling somebody.
Yeah.
And when you're in Saint Denis,
it's really easy to do.
Not a good thing.
No, Saint Denis is
all about in Saint Denis.
Kicked ant nest.
Nightmare.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I've run out of Saint Denis quite a lot with the warrant for the stupidest thing. But I only really started looking because I was doing research on queer history, because I knew nothing about queer history, except for things from the 1970s and up. And and Red Dead really is what encouraged me to start doing research from that time period. I'm so glad I did. Cowboys are essentially a queer icon. It's just since the 1950s, it's that, how can we have manliness back in films in the John Wayne era, and that they were really pushing back against that. So I'm not surprised that this has been worked in. But I was reading about these colors and how absolutely intentional it was. And I know that might be hard for a lot of modern people to think, well, we wear so many colors. Colors are so easily accessible in clothes nowadays. But back then it wasn't. Those wearing those bright colors, and it's not just red. I mean, you see red throughout the game. It's a popular color, but for it to be a bright red and to be satin or something like that on a character, that's an expensive garment. And if you were to wear that, you were trying to get attention. And it was intentionally meant as a code, especially purple. But, besides the clothes, I mean, the clothes, you throw out the clothes and that's fine. All that little stuff. I mean, you can look past all of that, and then you can get to more like what you talked about the Bastille. There's a prostitute in the Bastille that when she offers, to work for Arthur, and Arthur declines politely, and she'll say something along the lines of, "Oh, honey, it's okay. Your secret's safe with me," or something like that. And it's like,
yeah, there is like a bit of dialogue. I can't remember what exactly is that she says, but
or you're one of them. There's two different ones then that
something like that. And I remember thinking, what are you getting at?
Yeah, she says two different versions. And it's like, and I think you really only run into that in Saint Denis, because you would definitely not run into that in Rhodes. They would not want to.
No.
There's a lot of places that you would not advertise yourself. But in Saint Denis, I can see her being like, and she doesn't mean it as an insult. She's just like, "Oh, you're okay. Like, I gotcha, you're fine." And Arthur again doesn't even bat an eye. And he can't.
It's like you said, it's like, I can't remember. I don't know exactly how it is that she words it, but something like, "I'm not your type," or something like that.
There's several versions then. Oh, good. I'm so glad you've heard another one.
There's like that kind of like language. And I remember thinking, "Ma'am, don't out me. Don't out me like that." Not in front.
That's great to know that there's a third one, because I've never heard that one, but I've heard of other people saying that one. I've never personally gotten to hear that, but I've heard the other two, and it's always a different prostitute in the Bastille. So they're so that means that they're so used to having queer clients come in, queer male clients come in. They're like, "Oh, no, it's fine."
I mean, I know for a fact I've probably heard it on my current Let's Play on my YouTube. That's shameless plug there. But Tartan Hobbit on YouTube, yay! But yeah, like, I'm fairly certain anytime I was streaming and anytime I was in Bastille and Saint Denis, there's probably like several times where that dialogue is she's outside the bathroom in the room that you can rent out.
Yes.
And anytime I've like went by, she's probably made a comment or something like that if I've like rejected like her advancements. Because I'm a gentleman when I play Arthur.
Oh yeah, me too.
As fun as it is to kind of like rebuff them and to hear some of the comments, like the best one is when Arthur goes, "You should pay me." It's like my Arthur wouldn't disrespect me like that. My Arthur is a gentleman. Could be an asshole to the men, but not to the ladies.
Yes. No, I like Gentleman Arthur too. And I know, like Roger Clark has said, he believes canonically Arthur is supposed to be a gentleman and all that stuff. But yeah, so you have that. And I've heard people go, "Oh, no, she just knows he's an outlaw." No, she doesn't. She doesn't care who he is. She's not going to just like, I mean, we know shady stuff happens in the Bastille because you learn that when he first goes in there to try to locate information about Angelo Bronte. So there's a lot of shady people in there. She's not going to be like, "Oh, your secret's safe with me, honey," about that. I mean, and what would that have to do with her trying to like solicit him for sex? Nothing. And then let's get to the there's other things I'll mention after, but I want to get to Lillian because she is my savior in this entire argument. And because it cannot be denied, the things that she says, if you listen to her, and I have scoured the internet for videos that have Lillian talking, and I have several people that I'm going to thank in the credits for this, because there's several different YouTubers who have posted videos, not intending to learn everything she says, they're just testing things in the Bastille, and it happens to have her audio because she's sitting in there being Lillian. And listeners, if you haven't hung out with Lillian Powell, she is a mess, and she is a disaster queer to the max, and I adore her. And because
I always wonder, did she ever find Tom?
I don't know.
Did she ever find
It's
Tom?
a mystery.
Did Tom ever
Will she
arrive
ever
with
get her cocaine?
Did Tom ever bring her cocaine?
Did she ever get her cocaine? She is a nightmare, and she really is. She's supposed to represent all these famous women from that time period who were just nightmare human beings. And she likes it when Arthur insults her. You can go in there and insult her, and she's like, okay. She just
really likes that. She's
him like, all right, I'm more interested in you now.
A bit of a masochist. That's the vibe I get.
I've run into so many people on the internet who go, there's no actual words, there's no actual language. You're just projecting the, your queerness on their language that they're saying. Well, then you get Lillian Powell, who flat out says some undeniably queer stuff. She talks about wanting to eat up a little housewife.
Does anyone have a woman to spare? Nice little housewife I could devour.
She flat out is calling Tom a catamite. And I had to look that up because I was thinking, what is that she just said? And a catamite is an old word for a young man who sleeps with older men. And the term older men, I think people get way too caught up with that. When they say older men back then, 40 could be older men. And it's like 30 could be older. I think they just mean experienced men. And
who knows? Maybe Tom's with the guy upstairs, and maybe that's why.
Maybe that's Tom. Maybe that's Tom. Yeah. And then Tom went to what he was going to become a priest. Instead he became a catamite. And it's like, well, she could just be accusing him. But then she just starts talking about her husband, her dead husband, and how she had a lavender marriage.
He reminds me of my husband. Did I ever tell any of you fools about David? Oh, my God. He's a brilliant man. But there wasn't a busboy or a bellhop from here to Timbuktu he didn't seduce. Princes, paupers, office clerks. David had them all. No wonder his symphony was laughed at. He wrote a long section for the timpani. All because he was in love with the percussionist.
At some point, she refers to how bored she is for what she would not do for the love of a good woman. And you're thinking, what? And so it took me several times to listen to, because she goes on to say, I would give up all these different things. I would give up cocaine. I would give up that fancy little toy that I had imported from France. We know for the love of a good woman. She is a sapphic monster, and I love her because she's a horrible human being. But
can you imagine her and Black Belle together?
Oh, yeah.
They would cause anarchy.
I bet they hung out at some point. He probably was too much for Black Belle. The woman, she's just so crazy, but she talks about and she even at one point yells, oh, she's yelling at people who are appalled at the things that she's saying. And she's like, oh, get over it. You Puritans or something like that, because she is unapologetically sapphic. And she is representing these women in history from either New York or Chicago who in this time period in the late 1800s were unapologetically sapphic, and they could get away with it because of how rich they were.
I love how if you stand too close to her, she says, back up a bit. This isn't a square dance.
Yeah. She's so mean. She's such a bitch. But she is the prime example of this was intentional. And as we pointed out in the last game, there are so many tiny little details in this game for everything else. If you can track the weather patterns in Red Dead, then why wouldn't they intentionally put things like different colored vests for different things? If you have Lillian Powell sitting there like a beacon of of disaster lesbian, basically. And yeah, and then so then we get into, like you said, Black Belle. She talks about having been married a lot. I think she's also bisexual. She just, for one, she gives off that energy, right? I mean, yeah.
I've seen people in fan fiction pairing her and Sadie together.
Oh God, yes, yes. She gives that energy, and if not bisexual, she's definitely non-conformative gender wise and everything. But there's this lady that you can meet randomly in the woods, in like in near roads, and or outside of roads somewhere, and she scared me to death when I first met her. But she just goes on and on and on talking about Black Belle, and how she spent a lot of years running around with Black Belle. And she talks about her like the way she talks about her, she gushes about her. And it's like, and it's that way you do. And it's not like the way that like people do when they're showing off, like, oh yeah, I'm friends with this person. She's gushing about her. Like, oh my gosh, I hung out with Black Belle. And as usual, she ends up being like terrified of Arthur and runs off into the woods. But as they always do, no matter what you do, but in those kinds of nighttime encounters. But it's just really neat that they have that little detail. There's some videos of her online on YouTube. I only discovered her for the first time in my last playthrough, and it was so random. But she does kind of, for me, pushes that narrative that Black Belle is probably, bisexual. Prefers men, sure, because she married a lot, but
is that the elusive woman with the trousers?
No, that's somebody else.
Ah,
she doesn't say anything much. She just talks.
I didn't know that there was another woman going about the map with trousers.
Yeah, there is. There's a lady on a horse.
Like is it round about Emerald Ranch or something she hangs about? Or
I found her one time and I talked to her too. And again, it's so cool because it's like, there's a woman wearing pants. And she's just talking, but she doesn't really have much to say. I want to find her again and just follow her and not creep her out. So I have to follow her from a distance. Otherwise she's going to lose it. And I'll never find her again, but like, I got to find her and just follow her and see what she does. And just to learn her story, because I feel like there's a story there. Why would you put her in there? They never just put somebody in there that gets your attention like that for no reason. So that would be an interesting character to follow and figure out. I mean, she might be a little Easter egg for, oh gosh, I've lost her name. The female lead in the first Red Dead. I've lost her name.
Bonnie.
It could be that, but I feel like Bonnie's dressed up a little more feminine than this girl. This girl definitely looks like she's probably gonna.
I think for Bonnie in that as well.
Yeah.
I think the way Bonnie dresses is more out of practicality.
Yeah.
I mean, she's a rancher. So.
Yeah. And women didn't wear pants. They just
didn't. And obviously, when Red Dead 1 is set in like 1911.
Yeah.
So it's a whole new century, and we're like getting closer to World War One.
Yeah.
Say, and then the 1920s, and then things get a bit more androgynous with like women's fashion.
Yeah.
I am not one to talk about women's fashion. I have no fashion sense at all.
But that's stuff back then.
It's
beautiful stuff.
It's just interesting seeing that kind of challenging the gender norms in the game, and that's one thing that always irritates me when people say that about the so-called woke elements in Red Dead 2, saying, oh, it's like talking about like the women's suffrage movement and the votes for women. It's like, do you know your history? That was actually going on at that time in history.
Yeah.
In several parts of the world, it was starting to gain traction in the US at that time. It'd been going on in the UK for like a couple of years prior.
Yeah.
The suffragist movement was gaining ground at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like historically accurate.
Yeah.
And
yeah. And Arthur, and I'm going to spend more time talking about Arthur's view on on women and a whole, he's gonna get his own episode. But yeah, he, and I think that people forget that he actually makes fun of the suffragettes, not because they're women, but because he hates voting. So he hates the idea of voting. So he's like, why would you want to vote? And even Lillian Powell's saying that kind of stuff. She's like, why do you want the vote? Like, we don't need the vote. And then she's just so damn crazy. But I mean, there's stuff like that everywhere in it. Like you said, the fashion trends from, between Bonnie and then the random pants lady. And I need to go back and look at it. But I think the woman you meet who knows Black Belle, I think she's wearing pants in the same kind of style. And if she's not, I'll throw that out. But women wearing pants during that time period was not a normal thing. And if you did, you were trying to show you really meant business about why you were doing it. That you did not care what other people were thinking about you, because it was considered indecent for women to wear any kind of pants. And so, yeah, if you did it, you're riding a horse with your legs over it the way Sadie does. There's more. Of course, we have Algernon Wasp, which is like,
the guy wears a corset.
the man is just, and this is someone who considers himself a man, who is in love with a woman, who is very elitist and priggish, but he does just scream feminine. And he is so what someone who nowadays who would consider themselves to be non-binary would have been. You see these celebrities who are queer, who are wearing dresses and skirts and looking gorgeous, and he is basically that kind of a person. He knows that a lot of people in the circles of Saint Denis think he's ridiculous. He doesn't care. He likes what he's wearing.
See on Drag Race.
Yeah, he loves looking that way. And I think it's great that they made his character be in love with a woman, because it completely throws you off. That if you again, you only learn this if you do all of his lists, which I did, because I love that gay little hat. I treasure that gay little hat. I need to make a replica of that gorgeous hat.
I've only done that side quest once, and that was purely from a Let's Play. I will never do it again, because
same here.
I hated searching for all those bloody orchids.
Dang. The birds is what killed me.
Plumes, that took me so long.
The red egret plumes. Oh my God. I killed so many birds.
I just remember thinking Charles is going to be so disappointed in me. I'm killing all the wildlife.
Thinking I'm murdering all these animals. But if you do, so if you do his whole thing, you find out, he's in love with this woman. And it's not served for shock value. They don't say it and then wait for a joke from Arthur. Arthur's just wanting to make money. And yet Arthur's totally in this. He's like, okay, this is really ridiculous. But at the end, he loves the hat. He loves the gay little hat. And I'm sure there's some players who hate the gay little hat. I love the gay little hat.
I only did it not for the hat, but for the pistol.
He did. I love the pistol is so gay too. It's
Tahitian pearls.
It's it's such a pretty gun. Everything he gets is pretty, and Arthur loves it. And so you get Algernon, who is just looking like Algernon. And I want to put a little disclaimer in there: people shouldn't starve themselves.
No,
and that's not a good thing that he does that. So we're going to throw in his little interests in eccentricity, just like with Lillian Powell and her cocaine and everything she says in her elitism. But he's so a girly woman. So nowadays his character might have become might be trans femme or non-binary. We don't know. But it doesn't matter because
hugs.
Huh?
He likes giving hugs.
Oh yeah, he does. Yeah.
Arthur is not a huggy person, from what I've gathered. But
yeah, he doesn't like the hugs, but he doesn't stop people from hugging him. I've noticed too. It's he
accepts it, but at the same time, his face says all these I
don't know what to do, but I'll hug you. John would be like, Get off me.
Like Algernon just like, she left me for a postman. And Arthur's just like, there. Just, that's enough. Right. You stop crying now. You're
okay. I'm really uncomfortable right now with emotion. Yeah, and yeah, Algernon, everything Algernon says is just ridiculous. And he goes along the same strain as Margaret, who we talked about in the last episode. Mm-hmm. Just he's very obviously doesn't fit into the traditional mold of a man, and he is completely unapologetic about it. He's living his truth. And he doesn't really care. And I think that's great that they have him in there. They don't, because they have characters like him in there that it's like Chantenay, who you and Lillian, who you think they're just there to be a joke. But when it gets to the why is this character a joke? It's never involved. The joke of their character isn't ever involving the thing about them that feels innately queer. It's always about them being too stuffy or huffy or silly or cocaine addicts or painting dogs to look like lions. That's the joke. It's never the fact that they're queer.
They're like some of the most memorable side characters.
Yeah.
And
I mean, there's there's other things like there's and one of these you can experience only as John, and one you can experience as Arthur, but there is a mugging victim in Saint-Denis and a completely different mugging victim in Blackwater at night, that if you're close enough, you can hear the conversation. And in both situations, and the dialogue is different, the voices are different, the faces are different, the clothes are different. But in both situations, the person who is attacking the victim is using a bunch of slurs. And like calling him, using words like dandy and fancy man, but in a derogatory way, meant to be, I'm attacking you because you're queer. Is definitely, what would be considered a hate crime now. And if you rescue those men, and if you talk to them briefly, they do have a tone to their voice, kind of like Alden's, a stereotypical tone. It's not as obvious, but it's there. It's not like they don't immediately start doing this gruff tone. They sound more effeminate, and their clothes are like the one in Saint-Denis is wearing like a royal blue jacket and a red vest and like a red tie, real bright. And he does have a very pronounced sounding like effeminate voice. And then the man in Blackwater is actually wearing a pale pink tie, which the first time I've seen pink in the game that wasn't on a woman in the game. And same thing. So if you save them, they're very happy to be saved. And I think that's really great that you can have these moments where you can opt to have your main hero stop a hate crime against queer people. And I think that's great that they have that option in there. And to top it all off, if you fail to save them, if you hear them and approach them, or if you hear them and it clocks that you hear them and you keep going, you lose honor. So the game punishes the gamer for acknowledging it and not trying to stop it. But then again, the game also recognizes that if you're trying to find them and you can't find them, you lose honor, but then it'll come around again and you can try to save them again, because they do that a few times in the game where you can go back and try to improve your actions in the game. But the two young men up in the snow with the bear, and the one of them gets killed. When you find him, he's already been killed. And the way, though, that the other young man is lamenting about his missing friend, it feels along the kind of sadness that you would have if someone you love in a more romantic sense would be expressing, for especially a young man. Yeah, it's his friend. He would be absolutely upset, if it was just his friend that had gotten killed by that bear that Arthur, helps him with. But he's so upset. He's beside himself with with grief until the bear attacks again. And if you do manage, it's so hard to save that kid, but if you do manage to save him, he just runs away. But
I've not actually had that encounter. There's several encounters that I've not had. I've not really explored that part of the map.
Yeah.
But yeah, I never had an encounter with the guy and the bear up in the mountains.
It's really hard to save him. And I've watched several videos, and it's not going to end well for anybody. You can save him, but there's no conversation afterward. The kid freaks out and he runs off because he does get attacked. You can save him, but he gets hurt in the process. But it is one of these moments where you hear if you pay attention to what the character says and the way that the actor is portraying him, it's someone he really desperately cares about who has been killed. And it does feel very much like lamenting your partner. And it's a very sad little moment, because you do run into moments like that throughout the game anyway. There's all these untold stories, and that is the history. I mean, that's the truth.
Like the age old, oh, they were just roommates or they were just friends. It's like,
yeah,
very, very, very good friends, very close friends that would share a bed.
Yeah. And be in love and
dates together and hold hands when walking down the street. Yeah, friends.
They're just friends. Yeah.
Just friends.
They're just chummy.
Special friends.
When you look at Red Dead 2, and it's meant to be a game for everyone. Yeah. And I mean, I truly feel like it is. And the queerness of it and just the world building is, I feel like, is so appropriate. I mean, yeah, we all wish it would be more obvious, that they would have it be more obvious. And there were rumors that there had been more obvious subplots and everything. But I mean, for historical accuracy, they didn't know. I mean, the game uses the words that they used back then. They use the signs they used back then. There's all these gaps in the game where you could insert stories between characters, and especially with Arthur's background, we are so limited in seeing Arthur's life. And we are only allowed to see what Arthur lets us see. And I think that's fantastic, because we can put so much in there. That's where the fanfic comes in real strong. You can come up with so many stories.
I know the cast has stated this before in the past several times. I know Rogers said it, Steve Palmer said it, Monsieur Delau said it. But if you interpret the characters as queer, then you're within your right to do so, because it's a video game.
Yeah.
It's a piece of art. Art is up to interpretation.
Yes.
And if you're like a straight alpha bro kind of guy and you don't interpret it that way, then fine, that's your interpretation. It's not your place to say how others interpret a piece of art, because like you said, it's subjective.
Yeah,
everybody is going to have their own interpretation of what they think the characters' origins are, what the plot narratives are.
Yeah,
just anything linked within that universe. Yeah, it's because I know the way I interpret the story and the way I interpret the characters is going to be different to how you interpret it.
Yeah.
How others, to how the actors interpret it, because obviously the actors will have their own ideals. I mean, because I'm an acting student, and we're always told to kind of have an idea of character motivations and how we think of the character. Because I was in a class production recently, just before end of term, and nowhere in the script did it say that the character I was playing was queer. However, that was a creative decision that I did on myself, because it's like, does it say specifically, but that's how I interpret this character. interpreting it as a closeted lesbian, so why the hell not? Nowhere to say that it's not the case.
Yeah.
So there's no written rule to say unless it's specifically said.
I think that it's going to take these younger generation of historians who are open-minded. And the thing is that a lot of these people aren't, it's not that they're pulling this information out of nowhere. You know, it's been there. Kaz Rao has been my favorite person to follow on YouTube, and they talk about and so many of their videos about how do you figure this stuff out about queer history. And it's, well, you look at these historical documents, letters between people especially have been a big one, and their living situations and where they were and what was going on during this time period in this specific place. And, if you look at this through a queer lens, you can see it. It's happening. And yeah, we can't necessarily say absolutely for sure about every story that we hear about.
Queer people have been around since ancient times, and yeah, we're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And everybody's unique out in the world, and we're not all the same. And if we're all the same, it's a story that we're told when we're little kids, is there's nothing wrong with uniqueness, because if we were all the same, it would be boring. I think people just need to mind their business.
Yeah.
If people are queer or trans, or if they date outside of their so-called norm, then let them be. What business is it of yours?
Big thanks to Nicola for meeting with me for this episode. As with Riri and Lauren in the last episode, I had spent a good amount of time nerding out online about all things Red Dead with Nicola, and I was truly thrilled to actually get to talk to her. I bet some of you are thinking, wait, out of all the side characters in the game that are queer, why didn't I talk about Albert Mason? Well, this is because the next episode is going to be very special. It will feature an interview with the actor Matt Walton, who played our favorite awkward nature photographer. And yes, we will discuss all of Albert's adorable queerness. Until the next episode, I encourage all of you to be loyal to what matters and to always be gay, do crimes.